Welcome to Oklahoma Memo, the podcast. My name is Ryan, the founder and curator of Oklahoma Memo, and I'm joined, as I am every week, by Grant Hermes of Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes. How you doing, Grant?
Good. I'm good, Ryan. Before we get rolling, because I know you're not going to say it because you're too nice of a guy, but happy 1 year for Oklahoma Memo. It's fantastic stuff, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. And like everybody in business before me has said, that first year's real slow, and then it starts to take off, and just doing what I can to make information gathering a little bit easier for the people. So thank you very, very much.
Of course. I'm just riding your coattails here, man.
Well, I want to remind people of how to find you. The easiest way is I just remember MemsPod. I don't even type Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes anymore into YouTube or Substack, just MemsPod. So if you find it there, and you've had a lot of great conversations this week that I want us to touch on, but let's start here at home in Oklahoma. There was kind of a bombshell on Monday at the State of the State when Governor Stitt, in his last appearance before both chambers of the legislature, declared that he wanted to shut it down, meaning that he wanted to end medical marijuana in Oklahoma, which was passed by the people at a 57-43 clip. What do you think about that? What have you been hearing from folks about that? And how likely is it to actually get repealed?
Sure. Let's take some of those, let's take those in reverse here. So it's really hard in politics. It's like a really good rule of thumb. Once you give people something, it's hard to take it away. It's harder to take it away when those people voted saying they wanted it. So it's been what, 6 years since 8 years? 8 years since Oklahoma passed medical marijuana, and most of the voters are still the same voters. This is not like something that got passed in the 90s and you've had a new generation of voters come through. If anything, you've got new voters who are more pro-marijuana in the mix in Oklahoma than not. So it's a really odd political stance for him. It's an odd thing to say he wants this on the ballot in a year in which so many of members of his own party have to fight for their seats. Which that means more people will turn out at the polls, and if they're more upset about a Republican Party getting behind Kevin Stitt and his plan to remove medical marijuana, they're likely to lose because people will vote on that one issue who are turning out to vote who might not have otherwise turned out to vote. The other thing is that I found his reasoning behind this really wishy-washy, we'll say. I'll be generous about that. Cloudy at best. He said initially that it was a public safety issue, and then immediately rolled into saying it's a public safety issue because the business market of it is out of control. And those two things are different. I was working in Oklahoma when this got passed, when all these conversations about what would this look like if this were enacted, how would that work on the ground, how it would work with different agencies within the state government and law enforcement. And the thing you did here was that, hey, we don't have enough safeguards and guardrails on this. And it got put to a vote of the people, and the legislature slow-walked itself at that point in time. They really dragged their feet on that, I think, in an effort to try to tell voters, hey, we're not ready for this. Don't vote for this. And voters kind of said, screw you, do your job. And they didn't. And so what you got was the medical marijuana industry in Oklahoma, which is the Wild West for marijuana in the country right now. But for Stitt saying that it's a public safety issue to have an unregulated industry is pretty anti-Republican platform stuff. Pretty anti-free market. So that's a weird stance for him to take, especially, as somebody who I know that he's leaving. So he doesn't, I guess, have to care about that anymore. But the rest of his party does. The other thing, too, is that there is an actual public safety issue here that he could have talked about. There's been a lot of good reporting. There has been recent law enforcement studies done about the actual fact that Chinese state-supported entities are buying up land in Oklahoma. They are running grow operations, and a lot of those grow operations, not all of them, but a lot of them have at least some connection to drug cartels who are working with Chinese entities to bring in fentanyl into the United States, and then that comes up through the cartels. Generally, it's brought in by American citizens, however. We know that from ICE and DHS data. But, the cartels are the ones getting that fentanyl from China, and then that goes right up into Oklahoma through Texas. that's a legitimate thing that he could talk about. It's so odd. He could also just tell the members of his party to do their job and write new laws for this and regulate the industry in a way that it hasn't been, I know, for the better part of a decade at this point. But he could have said, hey, the experiment is over, and I'm calling on members of our party to keep Oklahomans safe, keep our money safe, and regulate this industry. And he didn't do that. And so it's just a weird stance for an outgoing governor to take. I would be curious if I was an investigative reporter in Oklahoma right now as to what kind of business ideas Kevin Stitt has lined up for after his governorship is over. We're a little ways away from that, but we're not that far away from that. And a lot of times you'll see an outgoing politician sort of seed the ground a little bit in a way that will benefit their revolving door job after leaving government. So I'd be curious to see if Kevin Stitt, I don't know, maybe he's, I don't want to speculate because I don't want to accuse him of something that isn't real, but like maybe worth looking into who his friends are and what kind of things he might be having lined up. The other thing here, which is the national part of this, is this idea of removing marijuana from the public in Oklahoma and asking them to do it actually cuts against what the Trump White House just did just a few months ago, which is to downgrade marijuana to a Schedule III narcotic, which puts it on the same level as something like a ketamine or not a Schedule I with heroin or meth or any of those things. So to say that marijuana is a public safety risk while the White House, the federal government, is saying it's actually not that big of a risk, in which that move from the White House, the administration, should allow more states to operate like Oklahoma, not fewer, is an interesting position to put the state in, because it could have made Oklahoma a national leader on how to do some of these things and how to run this industry. I don't necessarily know if it's the model. There are plenty of other states that have this, but Stitt could have set himself up and the state up in that way, and he's just choosing not to. And it really does feel like this came out of the blue. I don't remember him talking about this being such a big problem in the past 6 months or anything. It's not like he telegraphed this. So it's really odd.
We saw this with Ryan Walters when he left. For about the year beforehand, he was really talking about getting rid of teachers' unions. And he may have said it before, but he was really vocal about it. And then he ended up the CEO of an organization that does just that. At some point during the governor's speech, he said, well, by golly, there are more dispensaries than there are pharmacies, which, by the way, there are a lot of people who would say good.
Right. A lot of people consider dispensaries their pharmacies. I understand that. But like, it's also one of those things too, that again, it's a failure of the legislature to keep up with the people. This is not a failure of industry. It's a failure of the representatives of the people who elected them not doing their job. Yes, 8 years ago, but also in the last 8 years, they've got plenty of chances to do this every time they're in office. And every time they get elected, people still support this. People supported it when they voted for it. This is the legislature. And Oklahoma has been controlled by Kevin Stitt's party, not doing their job by not listening to the people of Oklahoma who said, we want this. And it's their job as legislators to say, we understand you want this, you voted for it, so you get it. We're going to make this thing safer, more prosperous for everybody involved. We are going to do this in a Colorado, California model, in even an East Coast model that tend to be a little stricter. So there were just a lot of ways to do this, and he just isn't calling for those things. And I think that's really odd. And the Ryan Walters thing is a perfect example of what I was talking about, that I would not be surprised if in a few months you hear Kevin Stitt start talking about, something else. I don't even know what the alternative to this would be. He's not going to go work for like Anheuser-Busch or something, but like, or like, he's not going to do a full Tucker Carlson and become like the, spokesperson for nicotine again or something, like Stitt's not going to be hawking Zins somewhere, but like, I don't think, but like, I would not be surprised if something like that happened, if some sort of competitor to a medical marijuana organization or whatever, and then Stitt comes in, or he is leaving to go become the chief drug enforcement analyst, blah 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 guy at a think tank or something, like one of those things. The drug policy analyst, advisor, whatever. Like that could also be a thing. I don't know, but worth keeping in view as this thing moves forward, especially as, or if I should say, the DEA and the DOJ continue down their path of downgrading marijuana, and then potentially, if polls get really, really bad for Republicans as we head towards the midterms, a potential move to fully decriminalize marijuana nationally, which can only be done by an act of Congress. So we could also see that, which would then also put Oklahoma out of lockstep with congressional Republicans, and would put congressional Republicans in the state of Oklahoma in a weird position too, with their own voters, with their own state government, and with the White House. So Stitt doing this does sort of step on quite a few toes.
It's not that government is incapable of regulating something this big. It's that this government, as it is now under Kevin Stitt, has been unable to do that. And just like with education, just like with everything else, if you're going to regulate it, it's going to require funding. Right now, Oklahoma has a big surplus, and it feels like the strategy is to say that he left with a huge surplus, which we would call hoarding.
Right. Right. And it is. And and it's pretty early to do that. Like, that's not a thing that you tend to see until, maybe 6 months out. You don't get that maybe to the end of the year, the financial year in June. It's an odd position. He could still say that he left the legislature with a big surplus if they adjourn, they sine die in what is it? It's still May. Their calendar, right? And he could say that he left them with a surplus for when they come back into office for the next session, and walk away with that. And then everything else is sort of not on his plate anymore. But he's doing this thing instead, which I also think is very strange. Or he could say that what he left Oklahoma with was a financial upswing, where he invests a bunch of money before he leaves, and the next person gets to run on the idea that they're going to continue these investments, the next Republican, I should say. And if you elect a Democrat into office, that person is going to pull all the money from these things and stick it where they want, and that's going to cause a lot of disruption. That's a pretty easy campaign message. Not that anybody wants to necessarily follow directly in Kevin Stitt's footsteps. They want to be their own governors, or their own, if they get elected. But, keep a good thing going, keep the party going is a pretty good campaign slogan. So
well, and I think Governor Stitt, if I were governor, I'd be thinking about legacy now.
Yes.
And I think about, he would get credit for big investments in education and in regulation where it needs regulating, and in trying to solve the housing crisis. I'll tell you, just reading the tea leaves here, and I told you this before we came on, if I'm Cindy Munson, I'm praying that this gets put on the ballot, because if you remember, when Brad Henry defeated Steve Largent, and I am convinced and will never be unconvinced that it was the cockfighting question on that got Henry elected.
Yeah.
Because strange constituency, but that's the way it worked out, because I would tell you, going into that election, Largent looked like an easy winner.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit before, but you're going to have so many people turn out to vote to keep medical marijuana, because it still remains really popular. It's only gotten more popular in the state of Oklahoma since it passed. That you're going to get a lot of new people who wouldn't normally vote to come out and vote just on that one issue. And if you're Cindy Munson, that's what you want. And if this becomes the thing, if Kevin Stitt doesn't change his mind, or doesn't get, watered down or added nuance or whatever, she should hammer this thing. I mean, any politician worth their salt will say they're going to take this thing away from you that you wanted. They're not for you. They're not for what you want. And do you want a continuation of that party in power? And that's it is a gift wrapped way to turn people out. Cindy Munson, from a political standpoint, would just be malpractice to not do that.
Right, 100%. The constituency for medical marijuana isn't a bunch of losers sitting on their couch. It's veterans with PTSD and with disabilities. It's people, senior citizens, 55, 60 and over, who have chronic pain, fibromyalgia, things like that. So it to those people. And by the way, when I posted the video, it was a lot of people saying, hey, I got off of having to take 32 pills every day.
Sure.
Not fentanyl, just supplements, pain meds, whatever.
Sure.
And now this one thing just helps me stay at even.
Yes. That is the industry that I just realized as you were talking about this, that I would keep an eye on after this, is the pain management clinic industry. The people who set up these clinics that John Oliver last week tonight had a really good piece about this. It's got to be at least a full season ago, if not more. But that these folks aren't doctors in the same sense, but they're also the people who were really big pushers of opioids and all that. So these, I would keep a close eye on that and Stitt's connections to that industry, because the pain management apparatus, this industrial complex of people, really do not like the explosion of medical marijuana and recreational marijuana across the country, because a lot of people do find that the products of marijuana treat some of those symptoms that they would otherwise be treated with much stronger pharmaceuticals and pain management pharmaceuticals, which have their place in medicine, but they don't always work for everybody. And so that's an industry to keep an eye on here, and how much you're seeing maybe in the coming months and weeks ads being paid for by, Oklahomans for pain management. Just saying, I know that's group, but something like that.
Right.
Pay attention to those things, because that would be the industry that would be on Stitt's side for this. I think that's where I would look next. Yeah.
As we wrap this segment up, I would just say that, viewer, listener, anytime you see a politician or somebody who's in office go from 0 to 100 or 100 to 0 on any issue, just start asking questions about why. Why? Mm-hmm. Not only why for the state, why for that elected official. We don't know what the situation might be, but again, this struck people as pretty strange. My prediction, it doesn't go to a vote of the people. It gets stopped in the legislature. And if it does, welcome Governor Cindy Munson to office.
Yeah, there's a lot of money in medical marijuana in the industry. These aren't dudes sitting around in, reefer ponchos with, smoking all day long. These aren't industries run by Cheech and Chong. These are heavily moneyed and deep-pocketed backed industries, and they're going to fight this thing. Absolutely.
And by the way, I bet that they would welcome tighter regulation.
Sure, absolutely. It keeps everybody safer.
So let's talk about a few national issues and things that you've talked about on Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes this week. We could start with ICE and the episode that you had about to fix immigration, you might have to break ICE.
Yeah, so I talked to a former senior advisor for civil rights at DHS, who was then the assistant director for regulatory affairs, speaking of regulation, and policy at ICE, a guy named Scott Shukart. He served at DHS in Obama's second term, in Trump's first term, and then moved over to ICE as the assistant director under Joe Biden before leaving back in January of 25, I should say. And we talked about what the problems are with ICE right now, in that he said that it's a fully rogue agency at this point, and the only way to handle this kind of a thing is to fully take it apart and give parts of it to other agencies, kind of like it was before DHS existed, and then maybe even create a whole new independent agency, or as he called it, like a trust or a trustee that would just deal with detention, because we are now getting this really awful by a lot of accounts. I mean, you've got measles outbreaks in detention centers. You've got stories of food that's likened to dog food, or they can't tell the difference between the food they're giving detainees and dog food. Overcrowding. You've assaults and people being in populations they should not be with in these detention centers, along with just broad mistreatment of detainees by ICE detention agents. And so you put that under either a department or the Bureau of Prisons or its own thing. But it was a really interesting conversation that I had with him, because this is a dude who believes in the mission of enforcing immigration laws. And he's still to the left of so many of the people who are in this administration right now, which is not hard to do, but in the idea of, what I describe as a long way of saying abolish ICE, basically. And it's hard, just as it was with the conversations about people who said they wanted to defund police, it's hard to be like, break apart ICE, we like enforcement, but you have to make sure that all the proper places go where they need to be so that people get their rights served, and also we keep criminals out and prosecuted. ICE. Like, that's hard to say as a slogan. So abolish ICE is what people say. But it was a really interesting conversation about what the future of ICE is going to have to be when the Trump administration is no longer an administration. And I think we're getting a lot of support for that, and things are moving in that direction. I've said it before, there was a poll that was just out at the end of last month where almost 60% of Americans said that they no longer support ICE. 46% said that they supported abolishing ICE, which is the first time that that's overtaken don't abolish ICE. It was 46-43, so it's still close, but it's more. And Americans generally support law enforcement. And so to have people say, yeah, it's time to get rid of this thing, more of them say that than not, that's something to pay attention to. The other thing that we talked about, too, was that and it dovetails with the fight over whether or not to fund the Department of Homeland Security in this. We've got, what is it, 6 today. The funding runs out on the 13th. So we've got 7 days left. We've got a week left before the funding that they just passed to avoid another government shutdown or end the partial government shutdown runs out again. And it includes remaking and re-shackling in a certain way, or putting up guardrails on ICE agents. And, he talked about those things were there before. And those things were generally understood to be how you do business as an immigration enforcement agency. And it is really fascinating to hear somebody who was on the inside of these conversations, who was on the inside of a lot of these policy decisions that were set in place that the current administration, in Scott's words, are now twisting and manipulating to mean something they don't mean. Case in point, there's a big fight right now, and this is a thing that I want listeners to understand, because they're going to hear a lot about it in the coming weeks, and it's confusing if you don't know what they're talking about. The big thing, or a good case in point here, is administrative warrants from DHS or from ICE versus judicial warrants. So what ICE is operating under right now are these things called administrative warrants, which is ICE signing a slip of paper, a warrant, that says they are allowed to enter homes, enter vehicles, businesses, churches, hospitals, courtrooms, to arrest people. Under the law, up until now, that is not how that's been understood, nor it's how courts have ruled on it. Generally, what those mean is that it gives ICE permission to operate in public spaces and carry out enforcement and removal operations, ERO. A judicial warrant, which comes from an actual judge, is the one that any law enforcement needs to enter your home, enter a private space. And it's generally been said that if that's how ICE is going to operate, they have to get that ruling from a judge. That does not include an immigration judge, which are a little bit separate when we talk about judges, because immigration judges are actually like executive judges, not judicial branch judges. It's kind of complicated, but just know that. And so what ICE has been doing is signing their own permission slips and saying, this piece of paper that I or Kristi Noem said she signed or whatever, even though a lot of times it's like the officer on the street signed their own slip, gives me permission to enter your home. And And like that is the thing you're going to hear a lot about, because Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, just this week said that that's a non-starter in these talks about whether or not to fund ICE and fund DHS, because he was like, what do we got to do? Every time we need to go arrest someone, we got to go talk to a judge. Every time we want to break in the door of some grandma's house, we got to go talk to a judge. Imagine how long that would take. And it's like, yeah, man, that's how the law has always worked up until Stephen Miller and DHS have put on these kind of unreachable quotas of 3,000 arrests a day or up to 1 million a week is what Miller actually wants, which is also insane because there'd just be nobody left at the end of the first month. Like ICE agents would have to be arresting each other because there'd just be nobody left to put cuffs on.
Right.
But it's like, yes, Mr. Speaker, like that is how this works. Because we have right to privacy, we have in the 4th and 14th Amendment, we have equal process and equal rights under the law under the 14th Amendment, as well as several other amendments. Like that thing is going to be a fight that you're going to hear about. But there are a list of 10 different provisions that Democrats want. Actually, I think I got it on my phone. Let me, because I want to make sure that I get these off. Because
by the way, I was just going to say, isn't it funny how we have people elected to the highest levels of the legislature, including Speaker of the House, who do not understand the Constitution?
Mike Johnson styles himself as a constitutional attorney. That's what he says about himself and his legal career. He is a lawyer. He went to law school, and like by all accounts was a fairly deft attorney for his causes. He's willfully misunderstanding, or at least willfully publicly seeming to misunderstand the difference on these things, and knows full well what the difference between an administrative warrant is and a judicial warrant, and what it takes in order for those things to happen. He knows the difference. And it is, not that Mike Johnson has been a bastion of honesty during his tenure as Speaker of the House, but this thing this week was pretty egregious just from a legal standpoint, pretending not to know the difference. Agreeing with how they operate is one thing, but just being like, what do you mean we got to get a warrant? It was pretty stunning from somebody who was a constitutional lawyer. Okay, so I've got it here. This is what Democrats are demanding that Republicans agree to make sure that DHS gets funded. We'll talk about the funding fight here in a second. But they want more targeted enforcement, which is a part of that warrant procedure. It also means that they have to require verification that a person is not a U.S. citizen before they arrest and detain them, because there was some new reporting out this week from the ACLU in Minnesota that 70% of the arrests that happened in Minnesota and detentions were of U.S. citizens. So it's not targeted enforcement at all. ICE agents and DHS agents are not allowed to wear masks. They're also required to show ID, their unique ID number, their last name, and their agency. And they have to verbalize their ID number and their last name if they are asked. Chuck Schumer said a thing yesterday where he said, we might let some agents wear masks if, they're being doxxed or they're having their photos taken by quote unquote terrorist groups, which, depending on what he means by that, you could follow the Trump administration's new designation of what a domestic terrorist is, which there actually is no legal framework for the White House to designate a domestic terrorist. So you'd get into some very tricky places there, and I don't know why Chuck Schumer opened that door. We could talk about that in a second, too. This is a big one, though, for them, is that protecting sensitive locations, which is prohibiting DHS agents from using their enforcement conduct near hospitals, schools, daycares. So that's Minnesota, where that comes from. Churches, which we've seen ICE agents going to churches. Courts and polling places, which is really important because, when we'll talk about this a little later, too, but Steve Bannon this week, the, on and off again MAGA, mystic? I don't know what do you want to call him.
Whisperer.
Yeah. He called for ICE agents at polling places around the country, stop racial profiling stops, uphold their use of force standards, which come right out of specifically Renee Good's death, but also Alex Parde's death and a lot of other instances of ICE officers ensuring state and local coordination and oversight, which also comes out of Minnesota, where local authorities have been basically shut out, frozen out of their own investigations. Safeguards into the system that would allow states to sue DHS, and then body cameras, which is difficult because there aren't enough. DHS defunded their body camera program essentially by getting rid of quite a few employees, all but 3 of them that oversaw that. And then they have this thing that says no paramilitary police, which is what it actually means is that DHS officers have to have uniforms. They have to have standardized uniforms. You're not allowed to run around in Converse and, tactical Lululemon or whatever they're wearing. You have to present as a law enforcement officer, and also not a military officer. You're not, I said it before we rolled, and I think I said it when I was talking to Scott too. Like, these guys are dressed like they're in Sicario, which is an excellent movie, but they're dressed like they're in a war zone, dressed like law enforcement. Don't dress like you're at war. That changes how you do your job. Psychologically, we know that from how people, when you dress differently, you stand differently, you behave differently. That's a real phenomenon. And then also how people respond to you. So that's a long list of things that the Democrats want. And right now, the Republicans are not on board with most of those things. There are some things that they could find some middle ground. The warrants is not one of them right now, but things like uniforms, things like body cameras, there are certain other elements of that, like protecting churches, that some Republicans are going to go with. There are a few of the things there. The thinking right now is that these proposals are sort of dead in the water. And what they might work on doing is passing a bill that funds other parts of DHS that aren't ICE. So that's FEMA, TSA, another of the that's the Coast Guard. Some of those things, that's another 9 other, or I guess 8, excluding ICE, agencies that fall under DHS. And then you've got ICE, which they said actually doesn't need to be funded by Congress because ICE got a massive new budget that I've said before. Like, it's so big it would make militaries of other countries around the world blush. They could just live off that funding for the next 3 years or whatever. That funding was not supposed to be used for the direct day-to-day operations. It's got specific ways that it needs to be used. And when that money was set aside, which was back when they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act over the summer last year, they were supposed to be these 2 separate funding streams that DHS promised they could keep separate between DHS and ICE, which just isn't possible logistically on the books. And proposing this thing where you would actually break off ICE and make it more or less its own department at that point, it's almost impossible to keep those funding streams separate. So that will likely be a no-go for a lot of Democrats. And the more popular, or I should say the more unpopular ICE gets, the less likely Democrats, especially the closer we get to the midterm elections, are going to want to go for compromise and reaching across the aisle. And potentially more Republicans are going to be for compromise because they know that their seats are at risk. They know people are upset about this stuff. And we'll see what happens. I mean, Chuck Schumer has repeatedly, the Senate leader for Democrats, has repeatedly shown to kind of be willing to bend over backward in a lot of places to work with Republicans, to work with the president. He is now caught in this little back and forth with the president over a funding project for a series of tunnels in New York, where Schumer is from, so that the president can. It's called the Gateway Project, that the president wants in exchange for that funding to name Dulles and Penn Station in D.C. after him, because that's the way that Donald Trump operates, is he slaps his names on things that are already existing. Which it's also, those things would have to take an act of Congress. He can't just do that. It's like the Kennedy Center too, but that's neither here nor there. Does Schumer sort of collapse under the weight of wanting to serve his own state here instead of serving the country in this way? I don't know. But right now we're in no man's land when it comes to what's going to happen with ICE and its funding. And it's really, really interesting because the more outlandish and the more rogue that ICE goes, the harder it's going to be to rein it in should Democrats win the House in November, which odds are, and history tells us, that that's generally what happens to the president's party is they lose in the midterms. Americans like balance. We like out with the old, in with the new. It's not that we're fickle. We just do that in the midterms, and it's just a thing that happens. The rare cases are 2022 and a few others where you have other things on the ballot or other things that just happened in 2022. It was because Roe v. Wade was overturned, and so you had Democrats win, but the president's going to lose here in November, more than likely. So we'll see what happens. And Democrats, because of that, have a fairly strong negotiating stance to push for these things. We'll see.
Momentum is a kind of a funny thing, and it does feel like with Tom Homan pulling 700 members of the 3,000 ICE patrol in Minnesota, pulling them out, it's been a little bit quieter this week.
Yes.
And it's that gives Republicans maybe a little bit of leverage. But I just think, Bad Bunny's going to play the Super Bowl this weekend. We're going to see how unpopular. I don't know what's going to happen at the Super Bowl if a chant breaks out, but
I would not be surprised if we hear a chant. There was just another one at a WWE event or what I don't know wrestling, and I feel terrible for someone who knows like AEW. I don't know what the other one is. My friend Mike Nellis is going to kill me for not knowing those things. But like, it was another chant in Vegas, in Las Vegas of all places. I would not be surprised if you hear something. I would not be surprised if something at the Super Bowl happens, whether it's a player, whether it is during the halftime show, at that Bad Bunny's in the middle of performing, and he is not a fan of ICE. He's not a fan of this president. And like, they're not going to stop him. They're not going to, cut away from the halftime show because Bad Bunny paid to be there. So that's, and he's got a contract. So, you got that. And and the president, there's been some new reporting, that said the president's not going to the Super Bowl because he was booed so badly at his last two sporting event appearances that he doesn't want to go because he did not like that. And he's saying that, the game is just too far away. And it's like, man, no, man.
You go to everywhere on the planet. Nothing's too far.
Right. You're the president of the United States. Nothing's too far. Yeah. So, I think we are going to see that. I also think that with the Olympics starting today, and technically they've already started, but like, we're already getting athletes speaking out publicly about ICE and HSI agents or ICE agents, but it's like the investigative arm of ICE being on the ground in Milan. There was a skier from the Twin Cities who spoke out against ICE publicly on social media already. We're going to see a lot of that. Actually, tomorrow I'm going to drop the little interview I did with Representative Mickey Dolenz, who was a Team USA member for the bobsledders, that I did with him about a week ago. And it was just such a good conversation that I didn't want to like can it and just use it for social. So I'm going to put it up on the Substack, and we talk a lot about what it means to have ICE on the ground in Milan, what it means for the games, for the athletes, and the idea that sports and politics have always been intertwined. No matter how many times people want them not to be, they just are. And the Olympics, more so than almost anything else. So, like, we're going to see those things. It's going to be a tough week to try to defend ICE. If you're the president, if you're a member of Congress, if you're a pundit or a supporter, it's going to be hard. The other thing that I think we should also talk about, too, when it comes to ICE is that we're going to get a lot of stories about the dysfunction of DHS and ICE coming up, partly because more knives are coming out among insiders within the administration, but also partly because you've got this drawdown from Tom Homan. You've got the abandoning of the mission in Lewiston, Maine by ICE. You've got all of these sort of pullbacks that are happening, the softening of this message, while also new reporting out that says that ICE has been stockpiling ammunition and weapons in places like Minnesota. And so you've got this thing where it's like, well, we're spending all this money for this ramp up, but you're pulling people back. What's happening to those things? It's it's very much looks like one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing within DHS. And now what they want is their own funding pipeline without any more accountability. And it's going to you're going to start to see a lot more people asking questions about how dysfunctional DHS and ICE actually are, and if that isn't hampering the mission that even they're setting out to do.
That's a great segue to our final topic. And I say it's a great segue because we talked about the dysfunction of regulating medical marijuana in Oklahoma, the dysfunction of DHS, and the potential dysfunction, the sure dysfunction that would happen if President Trump got his wish to nationalize elections. What are you hearing about that? Is that realistic?
No. So I have talked with, at least a half dozen election officials from around the country. And these are people who've done this stuff for a long time. And we're talking decades. And first of all, legally, there is kind of no way for the president to federalize elections in some way. Logistically, certainly for 2026, right now, there's just no real possible way to have enough people on the ground to take over elections, even if the president, when he said this on former deputy director of the FBI, podcaster turned FBI director turned podcaster again, Dan Bongino's podcast this week, Trump said, there are 15 places. And I think he's thinking about all the swing states plus, let's say 6 more states with Senate races and maybe some key districts. Okay. Even if you take those places, not a nationwide overhaul, we just don't have the people to do that. You would have to collapse all of DHS and move all of those agents to election day polling enforcement so that they could run the polls. You would have to get these people up to speed on the laws in those states because under the Constitution, states administer elections. It's very clear about that. It's one of the strengths of American democracy is that we don't have a federalized election system, and that these things are sort of broken up and done in very specific state level ways. And then even from there, in a lot of places like where Michigan, where I am, is so decentralized that it's almost it's like this weird spider web kind of a thing that you look at. We look at the tree of how all of these things move, and on one end of it, people who don't like that say that that's a recipe for a lot of places for things to fall through the cracks. Point well taken. There's a lot of work done every single year, even in the off years of elections, to make those things much more secure. And we know that they do work because we know that voter fraud is vanishingly small in all accounts, in any way you want to slice it. It has been for 40 years since people have been saying these things. And when the president said he wanted to nationalize elections, the White House came out and said, actually, what he was talking about was this bill that congressional Republicans are trying to get through called the SAVE Act, which is the Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility Act, which would disenfranchise a lot of people from voting. It requires you, when you go to register to vote, to have a real ID compliant identification that proves you're a citizen. A birth certificate does not work for that. Birth certificates are not real ID compliant. So it is just a real ID or it is a passport. While every state is supposed to be Real ID compliant because that law is now 21 years old. A lot of states aren't. Most people in America do not have a passport, so that's tricky. The wait time to get a passport now is 4 to 6 weeks. If you get an influx of 100 million people trying to get passports, that is going to be 8 to 12 weeks. And we're talking real problems with people trying to register to vote. They also need to show voter ID at the ballot box. Again, Real ID compliant, which is hard for a lot of people. And then there are a few other things about what that would do. But like the president wasn't talking about that. He was talking about getting the federal government into elections. So it's just not possible to do that. The thing that people are really worried about is what we saw in Fulton County last week in Georgia. And the thing that I said about Steve Bannon saying he wants ICE at polling places, which is you get federal agents staked out at these places, which is intimidating to people, even if non-citizens don't vote, which we know doesn't happen. It's like 10 people out of every 15 million votes are non-citizens. And most of the time, it's not voter impersonation. It's people who were naturalized, but their naturalization status has not made it into the voter rolls yet. So they get naturalized on November 1st, elections November 4th, they register to vote at their naturalization ceremony because you do that there, you can, at least in most states, and then they go to vote and they're not a citizen yet. Or they're legal residents, they think that means they can vote, they go vote. That's not what that means. Like, it's not people in the way that like someone like Elon Musk is talking about, or they're not being trucked in from across a border and then, sent into the voting booths. That's just not happening. So ICE at these polling places, though, we know that they have been arresting U.S. citizens. They've been racially profiling people in line. That's intimidating to people who do not want to get hassled by ICE, even if they are full U.S. citizens and just want to exercise their right to vote. The problem is, though, that if you have those guys there, they're also going to try to seize ballots afterwards, like they did in Fulton County, to have then the federal government count ballots, which would break quite a few state laws. You would get lawsuits that would get tied up in the courts. There's the potential that then members of Congress don't get seated because they, got elected or reelected. But if it's tied up in the courts, you've got this dispute, and then you've got sort of this like cobbled together government in which, under the Constitution, the president is allowed to send Congress into recess. There are some ways and procedures that happens because of a national emergency. That is the like sort of Caesar declaring himself emperor kind of a moment. A lot of things get in the way of that. First and foremost, the people on the ground who run your local elections are so passionate about what they do. I am such a huge booster for these people, and I have done so many stories with them, and they believe across the political spectrum so deeply in democracy and their mission of running elections safely and fairly so that we can, as Americans, do the most American thing that we do, which is vote, that they wouldn't stand for that. There are election officials at every state level who wouldn't stand for that. There are safeguards at the state level to prevent these things from happening. There are backups of backups of backups of these things. So you better believe if feds try to seize ballots that there are already policies and procedures in these ways that they would be able to just like have their own state counts in a lot of these places, especially if the president telegraphs that he wants to send federal agents to, I don't know, Detroit, where I am, right, which obviously would definitely be on that list. But like they would have ways to set these things up that would undo this. So, and then on top of it, members of Congress don't necessarily have to be sworn in by the Speaker of the House. They can be sworn in by a judge. The Speaker of the House officially sets the agenda for what happens in Congress, and then that's how a member gets fully seated and is a voting member of Congress. So let's say 22 districts, 25 districts end up with people in Congress who don't get seated and don't get to be voting members under Mike Johnson or whatever. Like, it won't be Mike Johnson. He's going to lose a seat, or he's going to lose his speakership. But like, let's say that happens. Like, how Americans aren't going to go for that. A lot of members of Congress aren't going to go for that. And there are stopgaps here for this thing. There are bridges that are too far. And interfering in this way for a lot of people will be one of them. And American people like voting. We saw it in Minneapolis. They held a special election, which no one goes to vote in a special election. People, and I'm quoting somebody else here, but like Minnesotans crawled over broken glass as ICE crawled around their largest city to go vote in this election. And people will likely not stop voting just because federal agents will be there. I know that I just said that a lot of people will be intimidated, and a lot of them will. I think just as many people will show out of spite to vote because ICE will be there. So, like, that's this whole thing. It is 100% the federal government attempting to meddle in elections. It absolutely is, because the president knows that his party will lose in the midterms because, like I said before, that's how this works in the midterms, and doesn't want that to happen. And funnily enough, the story that I put out just yesterday on the Make It Make Sense Substack was about the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the DOJ saying in 2022 that she thought it was wholly unconstitutional for the federal government to interfere in election administration at the state level. She is now running the agent or the division of the Department of Justice that is leading these lawsuits to do just that. It was something that nobody had reported before, but not that, consistency is the bread and butter of this administration either, but you're going to hear a lot of doom and gloom about elections and those things. And we are right to talk about them and to worry about them, because just having the conversation is a problem in and of itself. But know that there are lots of safeguards and there are lots of people who will not stand for it, voters included.
So I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the guy running for Congress out of District 4, Tom Cole's district, Colonel Jeff Pixley, and I love how he said it. He says, members of Congress are issued their spine by their constituencies.
Yes.
And so the more people talk, I'm telling you, the thing that creates change more than anything else doesn't come from the people in power. It's the power that the people have.
Yes, and it takes so few people to get a hold of your senator or your representative for them to change their mind. I mean, like, at the state level, it's like 7 people. At the national level, it's like 150 people. Like, it is in a district on average that has 750,000 people per representative. Like, it doesn't take very many people to change their minds or to put it on their radar to be like, ooh, uh-oh. And especially in an election year in which a lot of people might be not as safe as they thought they were to keep their seats. Like, it could make a real difference. Yeah.
I'm not just saying it, but I talk to John Croissant each week. He is running in District 1, the Tulsa area.
Yeah.
I don't know that Kevin Hearn's safe. I mean, I don't know that Tom Cole is safe. Stephanie Bice is going to lose. I'm just predicting it right now.
Tom Cole might not be safe.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Like, which would be a stunning upset in Congress. And that wouldn't be like national news.
Yes.
Because he's such a big player in Congress and such a elder statesman for Republicans. But the policies of the White House are not doing Republicans any favors. And messing with elections, messing with the thing that people like is hard. It honestly goes exactly back to what we started with Kevin Stitt and medical marijuana. Messing with things that people like gets you voted out of office.
So
it's just true.
It reminds me of in college. I worked there was a bar in Norman called Opie's. It's on Lindsay Street. I was the DJ, and you got instant feedback. You would play a song or a certain set of songs, nobody would dance. You're like, oh, I suck, I guess. So you change it up, you play what they want. You got that instant feedback. And I'm telling you, I just feel like the folks who are in power now at the state level and definitely at the federal level are not doing a great job gauging what Americans actually want. Yes, they want regulation of immigration. They don't want a free-flowing border, but they even more don't want the execution of it. Yeah, as it's been.
Yes. Republicans specifically are more afraid of the president. They are afraid of their MAGA base voters, their most base voters, who are also their most violent. Threats to lawmakers are on the rise. Lawmakers just got more than, I think, $100 million, definitely more than $100 million for, maybe more than $200 million now, if I think about it, for personal security. That was an increase because they're getting so many threats. Most, if not almost all of those are coming from the right, from the most extreme people on the right. There have been a lot of reporting stories done from anonymous members of the House and Senate who have said that they are physically afraid of their own voters because of what the president can have them do. January 6th, case in point. Defense rests on that one. So that's who they're responding to. If the other people who aren't those people get loud enough, and it's very clear that those members of Congress are going to lose their seats if they don't listen to this very loud chorus of people, they might change their tune. If they don't, they're out of a job. That's how voting works. That's how this works. The weird silver lining to the anti-democratic authoritarian push that is coming from the White House, which is not me saying that, that is people who study authoritarians and dictatorships, is that there is the real potential in the United States for a democratic surge, lowercase d democratic surge, people who are pro-democracy, pro-voting, anti-authoritarian from across the political spectrum. And that's a thing that we might see. We saw it in Minneapolis, we saw it in Chicago, we saw it in LA, we saw it in Portland, we saw it in DC. We could see it at the ballot box in November. We don't know yet, though.
To underscore, lowercase d, that can include Republicans. I know a lot of folks who are like, boy, give me a Mitt Romney right now.
Yes. I mean, like, I think that Republican Party is long dead. I think it'll take another decade to get back to that place, if they even can. But because much like dismantling ICE, there are conversations about potentially having to dismantle the Republican Party and rebuild it after Donald Trump. So that's a different conversation. But for a later day, because we're pushing an hour here. Yeah, but
that's how good conversations go. We rabbit hole ourselves. We're just free flowing here. So we've covered medical marijuana. We have covered ICE. We've covered the nationalization potentially of elections. And what I want to encourage you, if you're to this point watching this video, first off, thank you and congratulations for sitting through an hour, right? But I want you to go to Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes on YouTube, on Substack, wherever you get your podcasts, and engage. The way that you can help us, whether it be Oklahoma Memo or Make It Make Sense, is to leave comments, questions. Maybe you don't like what we're saying. Leave a comment. That's all good. But if you're listening to us on podcast, wherever you get them, leave a 5-star review. That just helps us in the algorithm. The algorithm is a fickle mistress. You have to get that review in there.
You do. And I read all of them. I try to respond to as many comments as possible, as long as you're nice-ish. It's the internet, I get it, but also, like, I try to, and I take that feedback. So, like, I do see those things.
Yeah, I do as well. Eventually, I'll just hide you, though. Okay, one final question real quick. Seahawks or Patriots?
Seahawks.
Rooting, or you think they'll win, or both?
Both. The Patriots were only bad for like 4 years. Like, Boston fans can hang on for a little bit. I think they are among the most insufferable fans on the planet, but or in at least the NFL. But I also, as a Minnesota Viking fan, would like Sam Darnold at the Seahawks to get a win here, partly out of spite against my own team, because I am so frustrated with them for letting him go. And I know this is sports talk, but like, we should have left J.J. McCarthy on the bench for another season to literally get his legs underneath him again, and get a sense of the speed of the NFL. And Sam brought us quite a long way last season, and now he's in the Super Bowl.
So I'll tell you, there's word on the street that the Minnesota Vikings are trying to make a push to get Joe Burrow.
Our whole existence for almost my entire life has just been us picking up the scrap quarterbacks of somebody else. Like, could we just not? I don't. I mean, like, at this point, I guess we have McCarthy. Stick with McCarthy. I understand he's made of glass, but like, could we just? That means make a better O-line. I don't know.
Grant, it's so funny. I could sense the exhaustion in your face. I'm so tired. I'm just so tired.
I'm so tired.
I will tell you, my wife and I both do this, but we have this phrase, good dude energy. Sam Darnold's got good dude energy. Drake May even has better energy. And I'm telling you, he's a good dude. The story about him and his wife meeting each other in middle school, I'm a sucker for that. But I'm also a big fan of Kenneth Walker, the Seahawks. I love how he runs. My wife and I, her family, big UCLA fans. Zach Charbonnet, he won't play. He's injured.
Yeah.
We like them. But I'm leaning Patriots. And I think the defense wins. I will tell you, I say this. I get that defense wins. I think the Seahawks win. I think the Seahawks win. I may be slightly rooting for New England, but I'm really rooting for Drake May. Oh,
Yeah, I get that.
And Ramondre Stevenson from
Sure.
OU.
Yeah, I think that the really interesting thing, and I just listened to somebody talk about this morning, is that this is the first time in quite a while the NFL has not had a, let's call it like a media-ready Super Bowl. A lot of these players on both the Patriots and Seahawks are not nationally well known. Nobody on these teams is going to bring in people like, Mahomes or Jalen Hurts or Travis Kelce. It's not going to get those people in the non-NFL normies into this game. And I kind of like that. Not because it means you have to be an NFL insider, but it means that a lot of the players who are longtime NFL workhorses who just go out and play good football are going to be in the spotlight for once. And not that those other guys I just mentioned aren't great football players. They are. But it's just that these teams are kind of made of younger names and workhorse players, and these guys get their day in the sun, and I kind of like that a lot.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when San Francisco and Cincinnati had their first Super Bowl, which was in Detroit, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have gone an hour. It's always good to talk to you, Grant. And if you haven't signed up for Oklahoma Memo, do that. OklahomaMemo.com/subscribe. Hit your inbox at 7 a.m. Monday through Saturday. For Grant Hermes, I am Ryan Welton, and we will talk to you later.